Welcome back to part number 3 of the Being a Masterful Life Purpose Coach webinar. This is part number 3, and we're going to be looking today at the Life on Purpose perspective, which is really a key part of one of the purposes of this Videonar, which is to add value to people's lives for the pure joy of it. I think you'll find a lot of nuggets of gold in this section. I also want to encourage you to, if you haven't already done so, to download the PDF file of the Life on Purpose perspective model, and you may even want to print that out so you can follow along in one of the sections that we'll be going through here in just a moment. We want to start with one of the problems. Remember, we're going to be answering the question of how do we overcome those primary obstacles to living on purpose? And one of those obstacles was the fact that many people misidentify the whole notion of what a life purpose is, and therefore that stops them or actually sends them off in the wrong direction to identify what their true life purpose is. So we're going to look at that in further from the Life on Purpose perspective by first looking at what the cultural perspective of a life purpose is. In other words, what would you say most people would say when they're asked the question, what is a life purpose? Not what their life purpose is, but what is, their particular definition or perspective of what a life purpose is. So we call that the cultural perspective. If you kind of imagine, if you were out and you interviewed 1,000 people asking this question, what do you consider a life purpose to be? What would be the most common theme or responses that you would expect to hear? And in fact, that's how we kind of came to this, is, in an informal way back before we even started Life on Purpose back in 1996, we asked a lot of people that question, and we found that there was a common theme to many of the responses itself. And that theme also will match with what you are able to observe about how we actually go about living our lives, especially in our Western culture. So, just take a moment, see if you can come up with what is that common theme that people would have, would answer to the question of what is a life purpose. So that's really what we're trying to get to here. Because here's the reason. How you go about answering this question of what is a life purpose will have a great deal of influence on how you go about answering the question, what is my life purpose? What is my personal life purpose itself? Okay, so many people have misidentified what a life purpose is. That's what I'm asserting here. And what they have said is this cultural perspective, this cultural view of a life purpose is that it's what we're meant to do while here on earth. And again, they may say that in different ways. What I'm here to do, that only I can do, what I'm here to accomplish, that will give me joy and satisfaction. But the common theme to so many of the responses is life purpose equals doing, is one way of saying that. And when you look from that perspective and you go about living your life and you go about trying to identify what your personal purpose is, well, what kind of life does this give you? Well, number one, it gives many people a life filled with a lot of doing, often to the point of overwhelm or burnout, and it often leads people to misidentify their life purpose. And two of the common places and common ways that they misidentify their life purpose is, number one is, they misidentify it as, their job or career or profession being their life purpose, which quite honestly is exactly what I did, years and years and years ago. If anybody had asked me from pretty much the age from 7 on up to about 37, what is my life purpose, or do I know my purpose, and if so, what is it? I would have said, yes, indeed, I know my life purpose, and it's to practice veterinary medicine. But that's not my life purpose. It never has been. That was my own brand of misidentifying my life purpose as my job or career or profession. A second way to misidentify is to think of some primary role in life, like being a good parent, a good mother or father or a good provider, and thinking that these primary roles being your life purpose. But I'm asserting and suggesting here that your life purpose is much greater than that. So we want to look at a different perspective. So we've got the cultural perspective that says life purpose is what we're meant to do while here on earth. And so we want to expand this. We want to look at it in a different way that for many people who've gone through this process have found that this is not only a more expansive way, but it opens a bigger possibility for life itself. And we call this the life on purpose perspective. And we're going to look at this in 2 or 3 different ways here in this Videonar, so you can really try this perspective on. And again, it goes like this. Consider that maybe a life purpose is the context, vessel, or container into which you pour your life. I'm going to say that again. A life purpose is the context, vessel, or container into which you pour your life. So here we have a mug, and we're going to use this coffee mug and the liquid inside of it as kind of a visual metaphor for this, because this is, for many people, this is a different way of looking at life and life purpose. So we want to give you an opportunity to try it on more in a much more deeply, a deep fashion itself. So we're saying the life purpose is the context, vessel, or container into which you pour your life, and this mug that is on the screen here that represents, and the liquid inside of it represents this way of thinking about life purpose. In other words, the mug would represent your life purpose as the context, vessel, or container into which you pour your life, and therefore the liquid inside of the mug would represent your life, right? Okay, well, so what? So what does this mean? Well, just as a mug can give shape to the liquid inside of it, when you know your life purpose with real clarity, as I often say, with that crystal clarity, then it gives shape and form to your life. And in this case, all of your life in your job, your life in those primary roles, each and every moment of your life can begin to be shaped by your life purpose. Your decisions, your choices, and your actions all get to be shaped by your life purpose when you know it with that kind of clarity. Okay, so remember the 4 obstacles to knowing your life purpose. Okay, one of the questions is, that we now are beginning to address is that many people who are asking the question, what is my life purpose, have misidentified their life purpose. So you can see in this, this life on purpose perspective, which is really deeply explored in passage number 2 of the life on purpose process, it really begins to shift people's thinking to a place where they've had a case of mistaken identity to really a more holistic and expansive way of viewing what our life purpose is, so they can get a much clearer experience of what their true, as I like to call it, their true divinely inspired life purpose is. So next, we want to look at how the life on purpose process and perspective addresses the obstacle number 3, which is that many people have been stopped by the fear and lack-based thinking. So we're going to look at this in a different model, and this is where the PDF will come in handy. If you have that and have printed that out, you can kind of follow along, and we're going to fill in some blanks here. And so if you don't have that yet and you want to get that, you may want to pause the video here for just a moment, but come right back to it, because this is I think you'll find a lot of possible nuggets of gold or insights out of this part of it. So again, we've got the life on purpose perspective and the cultural perspective. Remember, the cultural perspective says that your life purpose is really what you're here to do. In other words, doing an action is identified with life purpose. And what we're saying and asserting is that that is a case of mistaken identity, that this really this domain of life, this domain that we are identifying as the doingness of life, isn't really where your life purpose is at all. So we're Xing that part out here right now. And when we look at this kind of model, this model, and say, okay, we've got a part of life called doing, where all of our actions take place, then we can also see that there's a second part of life, and it's over here represented by circle number 2, and that domain, the aspect of life, is called the domain of having. So we have things in life, and this is where results show up. And oftentimes, as this little, not so little, this large semicircle arrow points to, is there's a relationship between the doing part of life, the action of life, and the having of life. We often do things so that we can have things. Okay? And yet, if we're not careful, in fact, for many people that are, in their probably 20 or younger even, you can get caught up in a vicious circle. You begin to think of your life purpose, the doing and having as being all of life. And you do things to have things. And maybe when you have that thing, you produce, that result, you meet that goal, then you're momentarily satisfied and fulfilled. But before long, you find out that there's something still missing in your life. So you go back to the doing and the having. We get into this kind of vicious, circle that's represented by this, other arrow down at the bottom. Okay, so now we're saying there's a bigger possibility that in the life on purpose perspective, that your life purpose as the context, vessel, or container that gives shape and form to all of your life, that there's a bigger possibility. In other words, there's another aspect of life that doesn't really get the attention that it deserves, and we can get, if we get caught up into this vicious circle of doing and having. And that aspect of life is called the being of life. Who are you? The being of a human being. And this is also the area of life where experience lives, like the actual experience of living, your life itself. And just like there's an effect, an influence on over here with the doing and having, as represented by that top semicircle arrow, this other semicircle arrow between the 3 and the 1, that just represents that there's also a direct impact and influence that this domain of being has on our doing. Said another way, that who we are, or who we consider ourselves to be, to say it more accurately, can have a direct impact and influence on literally what we see possible to do, what actions we see possible to take in the world. And then those actions that we see possible over time will have a direct effect on what we have, like the results of our lives. So, if this domain of being is so important, how do we gain access to it? How do we tap into the power that's available in this aspect of being a human being called being? Okay, so to identify this, we're going to begin to look at different parts of this and what they're made up of. So you'll see this kind of bold line right down the middle of the page between the being circle and separating the doing and having. Well, that line separates the physical part of the universe, you can see up there on the top, physical, from the non-physical, or you might term that the metaphysical. And so to get to how to really tap into the power of this being, we want to look at what's it made up of. But we're going to start on the easier side first. What's the physical part of the universe? So you see we got this little formula up there that something equals molecules of something else. So think back to like 9th grade science class. What did we learn was the basic building block of the physical universe? And if you said atoms, you got it right. And atoms kind of come together to form molecules of matter. Okay? That's pretty clear. That's the simple side. Now the question is, what's the non-physical or the metaphysical side of this model composed of? And you can see from the equation up there, oh, good, my little pointer's back. It disappeared for a while. That is now two parts. Blank plus blank equals molecules of blank, some other type of molecule. And what I'm saying here, I'm asking you to try on and consider that there's two things that come together to form a different molecule, and that all of the non-physical, the metaphysical part of life and part of a human being is made up of this. So think about this. What is it that gives us a sense of ourselves? And there's two parts that come together. And if you said that part of that was thoughts, you got half of it right. Our thoughts, or those recurring thoughts, give us a sense of ourselves, but not thoughts by themselves. There's some other really important component that kind of comes hand in hand with those thoughts. And if you're having trouble coming up with this, one of the ways to think of it is, I guess you could say stereotypically, this is the aspect of life and being a human being that some people say that men have problems getting in touch with, but women can get in touch with much more easily. And if you said again that was feelings, then yes. So we're saying that thoughts plus feelings come together, in this case, to form molecules of meaning. And this whole aspect of the non-physical or metaphysical part of life is made up of molecules of meaning. Now, what does this have to do with life and life purpose? Well, you see, we've got these two faucets here. And these faucets kind of represent that there's something that ends up kind of filling this area of being. That in one sense, being is like kind of like a vacuum over there on the physical side. That being is really kind of this some spiritual gurus say being is that kind of domain of all possibilities. It's kind of an empty space. But in human beings, that empty space oftentimes gets filled up. Well, filled up with what? Filled up with the thoughts and feelings. But not just any thoughts and feelings. We need to look and begin to distinguish a little bit more fully, because not all thoughts and feelings are necessary life enhancing, right? Some are pretty distracting from life, can be pretty disempowering. So that's why we have two faucets here and two other circles to identify. So you have the one circle here, which I'm going to say, and there's abbreviations here, that is the domain, the area of the non-physical called where your divinely inspired life purpose arises. And the key component of your divinely inspired life purpose is universal love. That's what the U in love stands for, universal love. And this can also, for many people, be equated to their relationship to a higher power or their spirituality. So when we're in touch with that and we've really got real clarity about what your divinely inspired life purpose is, it can begin to inform who you are, who you truly are, which then starts to affect and impact what you see possible to do that is consistent with your divinely inspired life purpose, and then you end up having the results which are also consistent with your divinely inspired life purpose. But there's this other area there, that number 5, that circle 5. Excuse me, my pointer keeps coming and going here, so I'm trying to work around that. That circle 5 is really also begins to identify that whole question that we had before about what is the, that obstacle that stops us. Remember the fear and lack-based thinking? So there's also a different place that can begin to affect and fill our sense of being. And we call this the inherited purpose. And it is based in fear and lack. It's the meaning that we have ascribed to life that gets formed very early in our life. Usually from the time we first start to get language up until, usually by mid-teenage years, it's pretty well formed. And it's also made up of thoughts and feelings. But these thoughts and feelings arise from a place of fear and lack. They're the thoughts and feelings that kind of spontaneously arise when we feel threatened or unsafe. And just like our divinely inspired life purpose can fill that sense of who we are, our true self, then we can also get this sense of who we are, who we have considered ourselves to be, but that's not our true self. That is this lie that we've been telling about ourselves and about life for so long that we've come to believe it's true, and it's not. So in the Life on Purpose process, one of the key components of that process that provides such value for everybody who goes through this process is helping them to identify and uncover their own inherited purpose. And when they do that, they begin to have the room to begin to have moments of choice. In other words, once you've kind of gone through the first 4 passages of the Life on Purpose process, you begin to see that life is pretty simple. It's not always easy, but it's pretty simple in that you get to choose which aspect or which purpose is going to, shape your life. Your divinely inspired life purpose is based in universal love, a sense of abundance, and a willingness to flow with life? Or is it going to be your inherited purpose that's based in fear and lack and results in a kind of inherent need to struggle to survive? And then you get to choose and choose and choose again. So, with this, again, we're looking at the 4 main obstacles. Many people aren't asking the question. Well, we've already addressed that you are, and more people are beginning to, ask the questions of, what is my life purpose? Those who are asking the questions and who have then misidentified their life purpose, well, we address that in quite a bit of depth in the, passage 2 that explores the life on purpose perspective in more depth than we have time to do so here. And then the third part, this thing about, people being stopped by the fear and lack-based thinking, well, that gets covered in passage 3 as they go through the process of uncovering that fear-based, lack-based inherited purpose itself. And then obstacle 4, where many people don't know how to go about answering the question, well, obviously the answer to that is the 6 passages of the Life on Purpose process itself. So, this is how Life on Purpose coaches are catalysts for creating a world on purpose, in that they get to live true to their own life purpose, their own divinely inspired life purpose. They get to, uncover their own inherited purpose and be responsible for it so they don't have to get stopped by it. As well, if they choose to become professional coaches and open a part-time or full-time coaching profession, coaching practice, or if they want to incorporate it into their current work as a minister or therapist or whatever, then they get to empower other people to create their life on purpose as well. Okay, so what's next? Well, in our last session, part 4, we're going to look at the process of how do you become a life on purpose coach in your life itself. And so between now and then, I'd like you to ask the question and address it and share it on our blog here. What has been your most significant insights that you've gleaned from this Videonar so far in this session, or session 2, or session 1, the 3 sessions we covered so far? What has been the most significant kind of nuggets of gold or aha moments or insights that you've gleaned from the Videonar so far? And how do you see that if you were to kind of begin to live from this life on purpose perspective, how do you see that enhancing your life? And then, of course, the last question is, what questions do you have that would help you to decide whether, being a part of this upcoming coaches mentoring program is a fit for you or not. And post your responses to these questions on our blog, and I'll be responding to as many of them as I can as we go along. In our next session, we'll look at specifics on the process on how do you become a life on purpose coach in your life. Until then, just stay tuned. We'll be back with you in a very short time. Take care.